It's a great privilege for me to be here today. Thank you, Mario, and thank you, the chairman of LRF, Jan, thank you very much. Thank you for all of you coming to listen. I am just a common vet that works driving around farms, sticking my hand up cows' bottoms and seeing if they're pregnant and doing terrible things to bulls to see if they're fertile. Ek praat so 'n bietjie Afrikaans, maar ek gebruik dit in die kroeg vir selfverdediging. So ek's 'n bietjie jammer. But anyway, today, jokes aside, I'm talking about something that I think when I'm driving around is a miracle, and I think it's the crux of livestock farming. Now, we've heard about how to look the third dimension into our livestock. The first dimension and second dimension is just looking at the animal, and then the third dimension is looking at his EBVs or her EBVs and making decisions about which ones to breed with which to get what we're looking for. So this now is just taking it back to earth for people on the ground. Now, the idea is that you'll leave here with a better understanding of what you're doing on the farm and understand that what you're trying to manage is a microscopic event. So you're trying to do something you can't even see. So it makes it a little bit complicated. Donnie Odendals asked me if you can take that number down quickly on a piece of paper and then send that off, and it's the V-Plan Network office, and then write your Christian name and surname, and then they will put you on a group, and then on your phones this afternoon you will receive the paperwork that he's going to talk to when we do the practical this afternoon. So if you could just take that down. Okay? I'm not used to having all wires around me like this. The last time I had that, I was in ICU and needed a stent. Right. So what is beef farming about? And this could be sheep farming, pig farming. Where do the calves come from? How do we get good quality calves regularly? Then I'm going to take you on this little journey with this uterus. Thanks to Kobus for getting it from foot and mouth free abattoir. And hopefully you'll appreciate this miracle a bit better when you drive home. We'll cover the anatomy and how it works, and the natural insurance is built in there by the Creator so that we don't make a mess. To succeed, we need a female in the correct condition and cycling, and as Steve Hughes told us yesterday, a bull that's breeding sound and eager with libido, plus the correct environment. And this basically means adequate food. It's the biggest driver of fertility. Overlay the above events on our rainy seasons, and then we'll achieve this miracle of conception. And I'm going to just mention some little ways how you read the situation. We as vets, when we come on farm, we read the situation quite quickly, and we get quite practiced at it, and we try and improve and give you good advice. So that picture shows us what we're trying to do. So there you have a little calf. It's properly presented with it. Just so you know, when you check and the feet are pointing upwards, you know that they're presented properly. If they're pointing down, it's going to be a breech birth. So you look at the little cloakies, you put your hand in, and if you feel the nose at the level of the carpus, then you know that it's ready to come. Stand back and let the girl have a go at getting it out herself. So that's our target. This is the uterus, and now I'm going to show you a few things on my little demonstration here. By the way, there's a bucket full of fat that I took off there. There's a huge amount. This animal came from the feedlot. There's a huge amount of fat that accumulates here around the vagina and then around the cervix, going right up into these membranes that suspend that uterus from the two lateral walls of that pelvis. So when you overfatten your heifers for shows, or you overfatten them, that fat gets into this little membrane here. As you can see, this little membrane has got lots of fat in it. And that then makes it difficult for this infundibulum to catch the little egg that I'm going to explain comes out from that follicle there when it actually ruptures. So just be aware, this is showing you where the fat levels build up. So just to go through the anatomy, on the outside what we see is the vulva with the clitoris at the bottom, and those two vulval lips stick together like an elastic bag, these Ziploc bags. And when an animal is on heat and you open that vulva, often the membranes will shine with the extra flow and mucus from being on heat driven by the estrogen. When she's in the luteal phase of her cycle or she's pregnant, often it's got a matte finish. So that's also just a little tip to know what's going on. Okay. So when you come to an animal on heat, generally if you're going to be doing AI, it should be shiny, and then you'll know I'm likely to find a bull string. Anyway, we move forward. This here is the vagina. This vagina, man hasn't made organs like this anywhere yet. That has folds this away, and it's got folds that away. And you can see these folds going here, and then there's fold here. Now you can imagine that a calf goes through there with a diameter, something like that. So that expands that away to let the calf out. As this whole uterus fills with up to 50 to 80 liters of fluids, that's the calf and the fluids, this has to stretch forward and go into the abdomen. So that is why we also get longitudinal stretch marks to allow it to stretch, to go forward into the abdomen from about 4 months as they go, 3.5, 4 months as they go over the pelvis. So this is quite a wonderful organ. Now this is not sterile, it's got bugs in it. Here we come and we have the cervix. And the cervix is like a door. It creates the sterile barrier that stops bacteria penetrating from there to there. And the cervix opens twice. It opens once to let the semen in, and it opens the next time to let the calf out. Or if the bull's infected the cow, to let pus out. So we can always look at that cervix and see if there's any fluid coming out. Now in that cervix, and it's melted because of the moisture that's come in post-death from this animal, the plug that's in there is melted. That's a mucus plug. And when you have estrogen flowing into this tract, it then liquefies that plug that's in there protecting this and it comes out, and that's the bull string that you find. So it's that clear mucus that comes out, and that's the bull string that you find when an animal's on heat. Now, when an animal's pregnant, that mucus will go hard and white, and that seals that off and protects what's happening and growing inside there. So you have the cervix. Now, when you're taught to do AI, the fact that it protrudes is the nemesis of people trying to do AI, because this fornix around here, you always get your pistolet stuck in there. You need to know how to close that off so that you can seal it, and then you guide with your finger, because you've got the rectum, you can put your hand in, and your little finger can guide that into the opening, the os of that cervix, to allow it to go through. And then you're going to go through and you're going to deposit your semen in that little cavity there, which is a very short body of the uterus. If you go any further, you'll start going down one side. And if you go down the side where you don't have the follicle, in other words, this side, say in this case, then your semen is not going to come all the way back. And although you can get conception, it's not likely. You are going to prejudice your AI. So it's important. That's where the AI deposits the semen. Now, with AI, you're depositing a half to a quarter of a mil, depending on the straw. Now, a bull will produce you 10 to 15 mils of ejaculate. He jumps, his penis hits, and it hits this cervix, and he sprays the ejaculate there. His penis is rubbing on the clitoris here that causes the female to release oxytocin, and then that causes waves that take that semen, and it splits. The semen will split and go that way and go up the uterus. And it doesn't swim, because this distance for a sperm is like from Cape to Cairo. So it's actually muscular activity from the wall of the uterus that's been sensitized by estrogen so that it can flow around. Okay, moving on. This now are the two horns. when they hang naturally from these membranes, they hang like merino horns, and at the end of it is a very tiny tube, which we call the oviduct. It's the size of a ballpoint pen. That goes down, and then at the end of it is this membrane called the infundibulum, and that's like a funnel. When the animal's on heat and it's got a big follicle, that wraps over the follicle like that, and as it ruptures at luteinization, then it collects that little oocyte, and that oocyte travels down that tiny little convoluted tube where it is brushed by hairs that are in that tube until it is ready, and that's about 6 hours there. The sperm comes up. Then the strong ones get through this little valve at the end. There's a little valve called the uterotubal junction. They sit there waiting, and then they mob this egg, and they all release enzymes, and then one of them will penetrate that ovum wall, and then it'll seal behind it, and conception is complete. Once that's happened, 1 or 2 days, that will come out of there, and it'll fall into this cavernous uterus. And it hangs around there for about 14 days, 2 weeks, before it was called implants. Now, a lot of failure for AI and conception is because if you stress that animal in that period, the adrenaline will take the blood away from here to go to the muscles so they can escape, and then this vital flow of blood that comes in this membrane on the side will feed through into the uterine lining. Now, that uterine lining has got cells in there that give off a uterine milk, and they are the lining cells that actually keep that little embryo alive for those 2 weeks before the placenta is properly formed. Now, those uterine glands are developed in the first 4 months of life. So it's critical that you don't have any scours or disease or crypto or anything in your calves in those first 4 months, so that you get adequate development of the uterine glands to sustain that little embryo, because the little embryo is growing exceptionally fast, and it only sucks in the fluid from, it's loose, and it rolls, and it actually sucks in fluid just across a membrane like that. So, it's extremely delicate existence. Okay? And from that moment, that little person or animal is in charge of its mother. It takes control. What happens after service, this follicle, when it's burst, we happen to just be lucky that we have a follicle and a seal on this animal, and I'll explain a bit later, but after that, this bursts inside the hole, develops your corpus luteum. So it changes from producing estrogen to producing progesterone. And right up until the end, till that calf decides it's had enough of being in its mother, that corpus luteum then will come off, some estrogen will flow, everything loosens up, so that like what happens with the cervix, all of the muscles and the fibrous joints in the pelvis loosen up to allow that calf to come up. So that's basically how it works. Now, in the uterus here, you have the placenta in cattle. Actually, I don't need to do that. This animal happened to be 6 weeks pregnant, as I mentioned, and there are the extensive membranes of a 6-week-old fetus. In here is a tiny little embryo that I can't even see without my glasses, but that is the amnion of a 6-week fetus. Okay, so it's grown like that from something you can't see within 6 weeks. So all happens very fast. And so as a consequence, you must know that when you're dipping or handling animals, you do not want to cause any adrenaline flow, because it can affect this. Okay, I'm going to leave this now and go back to the talk, and I've got a grubby hand, so this computer button's going to stick in time. Okay, so if you have a look at the picture there, if you have a look at the picture, sorry guys from the one side, but I've gone through all of this. This is how it all hangs. Now, the Creator very conveniently created for humans this rectum, which is very loosely attached in here and allows you to put your hand and be able to feel what's going on here. So it goes from this situation I've got in stuck here at 6 weeks to a massive bag full of calf and fluids that goes down into the pelvic cavity until the animal's born. So it's actually like a little, the whole female genital tract is like being pushed in from the outside into the abdomen for the creation of calves. Okay, so livestock farming is all about this miracle of conception, and it happens also in other animals. And this, we hear about fertility and we select for it, but it's actually quite complicated, and there's quite a process when you come and look at it this way. There's lots of things and lots of components to it, but that's basically what happens. And what I showed you is it happens in that tiny little tube, and you cannot see it, so it needs some precision management. This is just some of, I call it the maths and some of the laws of production. Fertility and growth, that's when we look at an animal, we see we want fertility and we want growth in our animals, a phenotype, and it's the G and W and H. A lot of geneticists will say G and E. I've broken it down into welfare, animal welfare, and health. And in welfare, the biggest thing is food and water, getting that right, and then animal husbandry practices. And if you get those right, then health almost becomes obsolete. We as vets, our whole objective is to make animals healthy and do ourselves out of a job, which I do often. And the genotype is what we've been focusing on a lot. I'm going to talk about the fertility and focus on that. So we've talked about that. That's the oviduct. It's a little tube, and farming is managing a microscopic event. That's just showing you in a schematic form how the egg is collected by the infundibulum, it's ovulated out of there, fallen into there, and it's gone down there. And here you have the sperm waiting that have come up here, and the synchrony of the hormones to get that bull to mate before she ovulates is quite a miracle too. Now, all those hormones have to be exactly synchronized so that the bull mounts, so that when she ovulates, the sperm's already been there for 6 or so hours, maturing, so that when the oocyte comes down, it's ready. Because if you don't get that synchrony, that's what can cause subfertility in cows. And sometimes if you don't get ovulation, we'll say, right, when you do the AI, you'll give a shot of Receptal or something like that, buserelin, and then that'll force her to ovulate so that the egg comes down, and you'll often get animals pregnant. So the synchronicity of those hormones tricking on and off is also created very young in an animal's life. Now, most of you who farm, who've got well-grown calves, you will start seeing the little heifers and bulls starting to mount each other from 3 or 4 months. That's already the hormones talking to them. Little bulls mounting their mothers and things like that. That's already the hormones starting to function. In little, thin, sickly, healthy, ribby calves, you won't see that. So that now those calves are going to struggle later on to be fertile. That's showing you that membrane again, and this membrane can fill up with fat. So you never really want to over-fatten your heifers because, one, it's expensive, and second, it's damaging. Now, you know, I'm fat and I've been trying to lose weight. It is not easy. So you've actually got to starve your heifers after you've made them fat to get them to be fertile. And I don't need to be fertile anymore. Right, so there's the ovum in the oviduct. These are the little cilia that are washing those cumulus cells off that oocyte that's tumbling down. So we've been through this: vulva, vagina, cervix, uterus, oviduct, ovary. Those are all the tools of the female. These are the hormones. So you've got 3 organs primarily talking to each other. You've got the pituitary at the base of the brain. This FSH and LH follicle stimulating hormone. That is the hormone that makes this follicle that I've got the green on. Look how pretty that is. That's what makes that grow. That hormone from the base of the brain. It gets to a certain size and a certain level, then that LH kicks in, and that LH will make that burst. And when that bursts, that's when the eggs release. So it's the brain that sends those hormones to make it happen. In the meantime, this follicle has been releasing estrogen. Now, that little thing is providing enough estrogen to turn a bull on completely. Okay, so it's pretty potent stuff that it can come from there. That'll enter the bloodstream, and that'll cause the female to go into pro-estrus, and show all those signs that we're familiar with on the farm. Okay, so that's hormones from the brain. Then there's also the hormones from the ovary. The estrogen, as I've mentioned, will come from there, and then later, once she's ovulated and either pregnant, or even if she's not pregnant, a seal will form until it's dislodged, again at day 17. If she's not pregnant, the uterine wall knows that. So at around about day 12 of pregnancy, the little egg, the embryo, will give off some hormones that actually tell the seal, do not disrupt. And the prostaglandins that come from the lining of the uterus will not knock out that seal. So we have made analogs of the prostaglandin that comes from the uterine wall, and those, the various brands, cloprostanol brands, and those we can use to manipulate to knock that seal out. Okay, so there's natural prostaglandins are actually in the lining of that uterine wall, which on around about day 17 in an animal that hasn't been mated will actually kick in, because there's nothing telling them not to do it. They knock that out, and in 3 days she comes on. This grows, FSH, LH, and that's the cyclicity of your heifers. Okay, so when your animals are cycling, there's quite a lot of things happening in there. Okay, the blood vessels are what take these hormones around, and these hormones are basically liquids, and with sensors and receptors. So it's quite a clever design. Okay. So the ovary is the generator of life. They're full of oocytes. The hormones drive them. FSH stimulates oocyte growth. Estrogen attracts the bull. LH ruptures the oocyte and releases the oocyte after mating. The ruptured follicle develops into a corpus luteum producing progesterone, and progesterone nurtures that embryo all the way to calving. So the ovary is the generator. It's created in the fetus well before it's born. So we must remember that ovary of the daughter, of the calf, is created long before she's even born, in the period of rapid early organogenesis in the first 6 weeks of life. So if you want to mess up your heifers of the future, make sure your cows are thin in autumn or just after mating. You need to make sure your animals don't have any feed crisis in that period, because that is now when new stem cells are being laid down in the ovaries of the daughters. How many are there of these stem cells? 14,000 to 250,000, I read. Now that's an awful lot of calves potentially that can be produced. And that's why IVF is so useful, because we can pull those out of the ovaries and then we can turn those into calves. But there's a massive insurance for production of calves built into those ovaries. So what affects them? It's the body condition of the dam during gestation, especially the early part of gestation, where we call fetal program is happening. So that little embryo and fetus is being programmed for his future life. And there's these things called epigenetics come in, and I'm no boff on it, but I know that there are certain things that can happen in that first early period that can carry over from their mother for more than one generation. Okay, so there are things that are happening from the environment that are going into those basic genes that can affect that calf for the future. Now, I'm wondering about something, and I drive around wondering. How come when we have bull breeders, a young guy who likes cattle will go and buy someone else's culls, and he will feed them better than the last guy, and he will choose his bulls better, and he can take those, what were originally crummy cows and heifers, and if he does it properly, he can turn into a really good stud breeder if he's fed his cattle well. So I've watched as guys over 10 years who have fed better than the first guy take people's culls, choose bulls carefully, and turn them into top studs. So I think that it's because some of the, and be careful culling, some of those animals you cull have got epigenetic memory or overlap from something you've done as management. So I don't know, it's an observation of mine. So what affects them? The body condition of the dam during gestation. We've talked about that. Dam condition and feeding determines the oocyte quality of her daughters. This is just showing you some pictures. That's what the follicles look like. And you can see that there's quite a number of follicles and only one becomes dominant. Now in each 21-day cycle, there are a number of waves, 2 to 3 sets of waves, where a number of follicles will be pulled out of the ovary, develop, and then and they're roughly 7 days apart. And then on the second or third wave, one will become dominant, and all the others will regress. So that just shows you when you look at an ovary, you'll see one big one and a number of other little ones. And when you look at the ovaries of different breeds, you will see that they seem to pull out different numbers of these follicles from being stem cells into little follicles. There's a corpus luteum that gives off progesterone. Just a little bit about the uterus, it's sterile. We've talked about the function, the uterine glands that produce this milk, and that there's a density per square centimeter. Implantation happens at 2 weeks, so remember the first 2 weeks post-service is very critical. In the placenta, we have apart from the cow and apart from the fetus, and those two together form a placenta. We have caruncles, which are little like lumps on the inside of the uterus, and they like a plug and play in with the cotyledons of the placenta. And you've all seen that when you handle a placenta of a cow. Those fluids can vary 60 to 100 liters, and it's the calf that triggers calving. The first 4 months after birth, the uterine glands develop and the hormone flow develops. So the critical thing in those first 4 months is to make sure that animal is fed critically, either with supplement or try and create a nice green patch, because we all know short green grass has probably 16% protein and can maintain pregnancy and milk flow, whereas brown grass can't. So you need to try and make sure you carve onto a green patch or a little bit of irrigation or oats, something like that. That's just showing the uterus. So our target on our farms is 365 days. And I just want to go into that in a little bit of math so we can see how critical it is to make this happen. So they're pregnant for 9 months, but when you do the sums, it's more likely 9.5 months. You have this voluntary waiting period, we call it. That's when the uterus is involuting, going back to normal, and it shrinks very quickly. That's normally 1.5 months. And then you roughly have 1.5 months, which, if you work that out, that's 6 weeks. If you're lucky, it's three heats, but in reality, it's normally only 2 heats. So if your cows are not spot on and cycling, you're going to skip. And so if you've got a short breeding season, you can only have it short when you've got a really good management of cow condition. If you have a longer bull breeding season, you can actually be more forgiving, and cows can have a longer period to involute and come on to heat, and I'm going to show you about that. So controlling nutrition and body condition is the key to all success in conception. So I've done this funny little graph, and you can see I'm not a mathematical genius, but let me just show on here, on the wall. Yeah. So this is, our target is to calve at 3.5, and then immediately they calve, they will lose 60 to 80 kilos in the calving process. So they've immediately dropped down to 3. And what do we see when we look at it? You will see that the paralumbar fossa, the little triangles, will have been filled out before calving, and then after calving, they have sunken in. Now, this first 21 days is quite a critical period, because if they crash like this and go down to 2.5 where you start seeing ribs, it's going to take you a period of time to try and get back, and you're going to have, the time she's ready to reconceive, which we know is roundabout between there and there, that's when she's going to cycle again. 2.5 plus and gaining weight to 3 is when she's cycling. You're going to actually have a 14-month intercalving period. So it's this drop after calving that you really need to focus on. Now in our dairies, we weigh them. We weigh them at calving or before calving and 21 days later. And if they've lost more than 1 kilo a day, we know we're going to struggle to get our ICP right. So if you want to on the farm, just weigh, and it'll tell you where you're going. Now to stop this deep decline like this, you need to make sure that you're giving adequate feed in this period, this first 6 to 8 weeks after calving. And if you do it right, what it does is it reduces your voluntary waiting period, and you then can start having cows conceiving very, very quickly after calving. And that's how you can even correct bad ICPs, by managing this period very, very carefully. I hope I've made that clear. You can manage and manipulate your intercalving period with feed and by managing properly. So this is my artistic skills. That's your back line. That can be a testicle, a scrotum, or an udder there. There's your cow and your last rib. This is where I read, and I just use a simple 1 to 5 scale. I know there are lots of clever scales. Basically, it's measuring your fat cover and your muscle fill. This is the hip bone, and these are the ribs, and this is your paralumbar fossa. Just read here. This is where to read. And then you can reduce this 21-day drop. You don't want to see, because what you generally see is this rib first shows this way, and you start to show ribs in that direction. If you go too far this way, you're going from 12-month intercalving period, 13-month, 14-month. I've skipped the season. So it's a simple way, okay? It doesn't need to be complicated. Read your cattle. This is just showing you some body condition. You've seen these pictures before. The target is to calve like that, where that paralumbar fossa is covered. If it's covered, I can assure you there's a little bit of fat around the tailhead, the brisket's pumped out a bit, and there's a little fat in front of the udder. That is what you want to carve in, and you don't want to be any higher, because you've wasted money putting on that fat. And then when it drops, you want it to go, it'll go in immediately anyway from calving, but you don't want to see too many ribs starting to show like this. Now what happens once a cow has lost its fat reserve, once those fat reserves are going, the muscles, because they're mainly water and they're used for producing energy, they will collapse very fast. So this period of time to happen, once the fat's gone, then and the muscle starts to be used, they collapse very fast. And you read your muscle fill here in the rump. Okay? So if you start seeing 3 or 4 ribs here, you're going to start seeing your muscles dissolving, because when they start to be used for energy and survival functions of the body, they melt. And that's where you have poverty cases of death, and you have these alert downers, and everybody cries and they die, but it's the farmer's fault. All right, now I'm just going to show you how you overlay this with the season, farming with nature, and you overlay this breeding season that I've talked about. So this is our African farming situation from a grass point of view. If that's the height of the grass, green, brown. So there's summer, height of summer. You've got relatively tall, long grass. Around about March, April, starts to go brown. It starts to get eaten, and it breaks down. And if you're in Zimbabwe, you have one hell of a fire here, and there's absolutely nothing, and now you're in big trouble. And then what happens is after the mid, June the 22nd, things start to heat up, you get a bit of spring, and this is generally when we calve here. This is our calving season in early spring, August, September, October, November. We know if we get November calves, they don't do well. They're too wet feet, it's too wet, and the grass is too tall already, and your protein levels have dropped a bit. So this is generally when we have our weak grain. That's when you want to drop your calves right early there. During the heavy rains, this is generally where we do our mating. And when we have very heavy rains in Zimbabwe, the cows will not walk, and they will not eat, and they will not cycle. And bulls don't like to mount where it's slippery because they know they're going to hurt their legs and fall and injure themselves. So I've had very poor PDs where we had 6 weeks of constant wet rain, and there's nothing wrong with the bulls or the cows. So anyway, this is the mating period, and then we have weak grains at the end, and then we wean here. Okay. So then what I've overlaid here is you want to be at 3.5 calving, your final trimester, your BCS goes down to 2.5 possibly if you let it go too far. So if you've let it gone too far and the grass has grown too tall, as your grass gets over ankle height, your protein content starts to go down because the grass is making its own effort to produce seed, and it sends up seed heads, and then the grass, the leaf area declines, and it goes more into producing the seed as opposed to growth of the green grass. So you're actually getting out of the period where the cattle can gain weight on the veld. You'd need to supplement them if they're too thin. But this is where conception and implantation's happening, January, February, March. This is autumn, where you're having your organogenesis in your young animals, where they are getting their hormones and developing their little ovaries and their little testicles, so that at 4 months of age, when they go to weaning, they look like little bulls and little heifers because the hormones are functioning right. So just be aware that this is all happening on your farm in the seasonal overlay of what's happening to what's happening here in your cows on the farm. Okay. I had a recent Thule cow. She was pregnant 280 days. We scanned and we worked out that she had been served on day 26 post-calving. So that worked out at 306 days to produce a calf for 10 months. That is 6 calves in 5 years if she continued that, because 5 years times 12 is 60 months, divided by 10 months intercalving period, that's 6 calves. And if she's had her first calf at 2, she'd have 12 calves in 12 years. It works out at 120% calving. Now, we think, oh, are you crazy? But we can do the sums, it's maths. So you can reduce your ICP. What I'm saying is by managing that close-up period, that first 6 weeks after calving correctly, you can actually manage your ICP, and you can shorten your ICP if you do it properly. So how do you decide some of these ideal cows for your farm? And this, I think I probably stole this from Dani. You identify her and select her, and how you're going to do that. Next time that blasted vet comes and it charges you a fortune, make sure at the exit of your race you've got a sort gate. Everything that's empty goes one side, and everything that's pregnant goes the other side. And when you finish, both of you sit there and you evaluate which ones are pregnant and which ones aren't. And try and establish, is it the wrong body type? Is it the wrong body size? Is it the wrong breed? Which ones are more in the empties than from the positives? And that'll give you a very good clue of what's going on your farm and what's adapted, without you deciding yourself who you should have on your farm. Okay, so the answers: nutritional management is absolutely key. It's the foundation of farming, getting that to happen. We are in Zimbabwe, our costs are so high. We are big into regenerative agriculture and making that nutrition come from grass. We want small frame, grass-fed, indigenous cattle. They deliver all the time. Your fodder flow is important, especially when you've got fires and issues like that around. Cash flow management to keep up with your fodder flow is critical. Remember, short green grass can support conception and growth. Brown grass struggles to do that. Monthly weigh your cattle and body condition, score them, then you know where you are, and you can read the cattle at the same time, and then you can see where you are, and you can manage your herds better. Manage body condition score, and the miracle of conception will take place, even though you can't see it. Anyway, that's my story. Thank you.